gives me safe distance. So I didn't actually have to go out and go to Tea Party meetings and the Tea Party became a thing that I was watching get covered, but really actually what I was looking at was the way the media covered it. So I was really more interested in how the media told the story of the Tea Party as opposed to the Tea Party itself. So my safety was fine. I mean, in fact, I didn't need to go to a rally.
But I think this what you're talking about, and I think what this book offers in terms of an analysis of not of the media, right? Like using the Tea Party as a way to teach us things about the media is really important at a time when I think on the right, certainly from Trump, but also in the left, people talk about the media, but sometimes in really simplistic ways, right? Just like the media just brainwashes people, but even on the left, and sometimes even among like black folks, we can talk about it in reductive ways. And I think this book offers seems to offer a much more complicated analysis and with a lot of evidence, going into it. So on the issue of branding, can I just say, you talk about the branding of right-wing activism. What does branding have to do with all this?
Okay, so I had no desire to talk about branding. Like, that is not my thing at all. It became something that emerged from like the media coverage. So over and over, I wanted to just study the Tea Party because I thought it would just tell me about like why racist white people hated Obama or something like that, right?
That was your question going in.
My question going in was like, what does the Tea Party tell us about this particular political moment, right? And what does the news coverage tell us? Because I wanted to look at it as, a lot of times media scholars look at news texts as being moments like archives, like snapshots of what our society looks like. So recently, like, I don't know how many of you saw, Washington posted a piece this past Sunday on Pride that was all about like what the coverage looked like of Stonewall at the moment that it happened. It was really terrible language, words we wouldn't use to describe queer people right now. And so I so often we think this is a snapshot of what this culture was at this moment, what were the norms, right? And so that was going to be the project. But over and over again, I kept seeing weird things happening in the text. So, for example, there was this one group that was called Our Country Deserves Better. It was a PAC, a political action committee, like people who have money, right, to fund candidates. And they changed their name to Tea Party in the midst of the kind of Tea Party getting attention, right? So it was a group that already existed. They changed their name and they become one of the most powerful representatives of the Tea Party for all of the media coverage, right? But it was a weird thing. And then a lot of the coverage that kept coming up was about how much money the Tea Party was making, and how much money it was drawing from large donors. And so money kept coming up, profit kept coming up over and over again. And then branding came up as a term. Like Bill O'Reilly was like, oh, they're trying to brand them all as racist. And so
like the media's using the term brand.
And then of course, and I mean, sure, y'all all watch the news, and so you see some of these patterns where markets and polls, right? Surveys are always, and these are all marketing tools, right? Like this is market research. What does the audience tell us about this thing? Even now, right? The way that you become a Democratic candidate in the primaries now is how many people donate money to you, right? And so I started being like, okay, so politics and the way that the news is reporting is really fixated on money as the key value, right? And it's a distortion of how we generally understood politics. Like we haven't said, oh, just because, I mean, we at least don't explicitly say just because this person has more money, they're a better citizen, right? Or their citizenship is more worthwhile. Movements used to get covered because of how many people showed up. Like 20 people would show up to a Tea Party rally sometimes, maybe 100, maybe like a few dozen, right? And it would still get news coverage. And so there was a kind of, and meanwhile, I was saying a few years later, the Moral Monday marches that happened in the South, there was like the biggest march that had happened in the South in 50 years, got virtually no news coverage. And so I realized that there's something here
so you
that
was kind of an imbalance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like for some reason, the Tea Party is getting a vastly more coverage.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And coverage that's money focused, or
that's money. That's I mean, so a lot of times in political branding, it's not just about profits; it's about votes too. So when they say that they're trying to get out or draw a specific kind of base, it's like the way we talk about Trump, right? He has a political brand. People recognize it very easily. It's a cognitive shortcut. You see it. You kind of understand what it's supposed to represent. and he stays on brand really well, actually. And then he has a group of people who have loyalty to them the way that some people have loyalty to like Tide, or like certain kinds of cleaners that you might use, or McDonald's, or like things. Because the thing about branding is that it's not just the thing they're selling. So products used to just sell, like brands used to just sell product. Like, you know, you like Dove soap because you're like in bad skin or something like that. Bad skin. So you only buy Dove, right? There's an exchange, but actually branding then started becoming about something more than that. It started becoming about the ways in which people feel attached to the product, right? So it's not just that you like Dove because it does something for your skin, but because your mom used it, it gives you good memories of when you went to camp when you were a kid. Like that becomes this affective relationship. And I started feeling like over and over again too in the coverage, the affective relationship, the fact that people felt angry, right, was a big thing that kept coming up over and over again in the coverage of the Tea Party.
Yeah, no, I thought this was a great point that you bring up in the book, which is that so much of the coverage focused on what they were against, and they in fact did stand for things, right? Mm-hmm. But just what you said is that they focused so much on what they were against that we didn't get a sense of what they stood for.
Yeah, I mean, because what they stood for depended on who was covering it at any given moment. I mean, so sometimes it was just who happened to be in the crowd that day at a rally, which happens all the time with social movement coverage. But often it was about like kind of a top-down explanation. So you had somebody writing an op-ed about it, or you had somebody who represented a PAC talking about it.
One of the things I wanted to ask, this is what I want to get to. So I remember I remember being frustrated at the time when the Tea Party was being covered, because there were other social movements happening at a similar time, thinking about Occupy and various anti-racist movements that were happening. And I remember the Tea Party was often posed as the conservative equivalent of those more grassroots types of movements, which I found really frustrating. And I remember I actually sort of can't really tolerate MSNBC at this point in my life, but at that time I used to watch Rachel Maddow a lot. Mm-hmm. And she did this like whole coverage about the money behind the Tea Party. So for me, I thought that settled it, right? Mm-hmm. Like the Tea Party is an astroturf. It's not a grassroots movement. It's an astroturf movement. Your book, I guess what I want to know is, was that correct? Because your book seems to even complicate that way of understanding things. Yeah,
I mean, so like I have to step very gingerly because there's like a very famous political scientist who's written a book about the Tea Party. It has quite a lot of citations, and you know, they claim it was a real social movement. And the way that they claim it was a real social movement is they went to Tea Party meetings and they went to Tea Party events and they said these are real people who care about this and they're coming out, right? And that's true. Like, I'm not gonna disagree with that, but it's a weird movement if it's a movement, right? Because it started with a reporter. Like I actually couldn't find anything analogous to it in American history. Something that was started by a reporter while on the job, right? You do have like reporters who are known for speaking their mind, writing good op-eds. There's a long tradition of that. But to understand something as being triggered by a reporter, and then to have something like Fox News where they were actually advertising where rallies were happening and they'd show you on a map where you could go to a Tea Party. They were headlining Tea Party events. It was a very different kind of phenomenon.
Say more. When you say they're headlining, you say more what you
I mean, some of them got in trouble where there would be a Tea Party event and it would say featuring, and I don't want to say the wrong show host. Yeah, but they would, like, let's say it was Sean Hannity. They'd be like, Sean Hannity is going to be at this event tonight, right? There were a couple of times where I think Fox News actually stepped in and told somebody you can't go to this event because obviously you're now the guest. Like, people are paying to come to this event to see you. You're not reporting on it. There were moments where like Fox News producers were caught getting the crowd to like scream for them so they could get B-roll from rallying up the crowd, and a producer got in trouble for that. But then there were like the Fox News literally took out for one Tea Party rally. After one Tea Party rally, they took out an ad in the Washington Post saying that CNN, MSNBC, and other outlets, specifically naming them, did not cover this rally. a full page ad, right? Saying, why aren't you covering this news? And so they were literally provoking news coverage of the Tea Party.
That's right. That's so different. It wasn't like, I don't remember a moment. I mean, maybe it happened that I didn't see the moment where it was like Don Lemon hosts an Occupy Wall Street. Like, Black Lives Matter. Event, right? It's not.
No, and it wasn't. You didn't see like series of hosts on CNN telling you where to show up to be up there to meet them at events or where their local Black Lives Matter protest was today. Like that's not a thing that has happened.
Why do you think that the media was so invested? I mean, this is kind of a loaded because I know there's a part of an answer you get. Was so invested in this branding and then of the Tea Party.
So I mean, and I can't even remember what I said in the book. Honestly.
Well, you said a lot of things.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the money part.
Well, I think it's because of how. So part of it is what I was saying around. I'm not sure if this is what I said in the book, but part of it is this notion of the value of a citizen and kind of following the money to understand what citizenship looks like or who should be important. But I think partly it was natural. Like it was like there's this spectacle of whiteness happening, and we have the first Black president. We expect some sort of response after Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin. We had this whole if y'all remember 2008, like it was like everybody was brand new. Melissa Harris Perry got a show. Like they were like Black people exist, right? And it even happened in the field of political communication. All of a sudden, everybody was like, I should study race. It was like there was race before there was a Black president. But there was this moment in which all of a sudden everybody said race and gender mattered after this primary. And I think it hypersensitized the media to, well, what is going to be the backlash to this movement, to this kind of Black man presidency. And so that's part of why I think it was a natural thing at first, but then I think it became like a media feedback loop, right? Like if the conservative media machine in concert are working on something together and telling everybody that they need to report on it, then people start to pick up on it. Oh, can I say one of my favorite stories? Okay, so like one of the stories, do y'all remember Shirley Sherrod?
No.
Killed by, he was lynched when she was a child. And so she's talking to the NAACP at this meeting, and he edits it to make it sound like she's saying, I didn't help this white farmer, right? And I didn't give him all my help I could get. And all of a sudden, she's just as bad as this other Tea Party guy who had right before then written a letter in like Black speak where he asked Master to put us back into slavery because it was too hard to be freed. It was all a joke, guys. Don't worry. It was satirical satire. So anyway, they basically the media equates Shirley Sherrod with this guy, and she gets fired. Like Obama denounces her, the NAACP denounces before they get the video. This is from Breitbart, right? So this is one of those things where you realize like, okay, there's something really terrible happening, and the conservative influence over the media is very strong, right? To the extent that they're not just responding to like things they actually see, but they're like taking Breitbart, who can release something on Fox, who can then pump out messaging across all the media platforms really quickly. Later, O'Reilly apologizes, but Sherrod is already fired. And, I can't remember if Obama apologizes. And can I just say, okay, so I was a White House intern. I say this often, but I don't know if I've ever said it publicly at an event. The camera's not on, so it doesn't matter. When I was, it's back on. I don't care. I was a White House intern who noticed there weren't that many women of color that you could always see all the time. A lot of the like kind of white guys who know each other get hired after a campaign is over into the White House. And so I started doing these meetings where I got to get women of color from around the White House to talk. It was awesome, actually. It also got shut down. As I was leaving pretty quickly, I got called into the general counsel's office, the White House counsel's office, and they asked me, had I mentioned this thing anywhere else? They wanted to know what records of it existed. They wanted it disappeared, right? So this is like under the first Black president, right? This is when everybody's
they wanted the space that you had created for people to talk.
They wanted it completely gone. Wow. Because at that time, like interns had a way of meeting and doing around certain interest groups. There's like Asian Pacific Islanders, there's the LGBTQ, there were all these ways in which the White House already had kind of started relationships with other people across the administration, and you could try to kind of create something. So I was told that you could create, so I wrote this long document about women of color in particular and why they were important as a group and why we should have spaces for them, blah, blah, blah. And the White House like kind of destroyed it, deleted it. And so I think we have to understand that like the conservative influence over Obama was quite high. I mean, from what I understood, at least gathered, that maybe there was a fear of Fox News catching wind that there was a woman of color group happening at the White House, and they were afraid of the way it might be framed.
So it's the conservative influence, but being translated through the Democratic Party as they internalized
and self-police, right? So this is why Shirley Sherrod gets sacrificed at the altar of Breitbart, like, you know, without even having to watch the whole video, which for me was heartbreaking.
I mean, do you think that we know that a criticism of Obama has been that he was far too invested in the idea of a grand compromise in ways that conservatives have just not even tried to reciprocate and even pretended to reciprocate. Do you think that this was related to that, or do you think it was something that wouldn't have mattered what administration it was?
I mean, it was a long time ago, and I you know, part of me thinks it might have just been like the uneasiness that some white men have when women of color get together in a room that they can't get into. And so I think that might have made them a little nervous.
Just the sense that you can't come to this space.
Yeah, we went into the West Wing and had a meeting, right? And Cecilia Munoz was the only, you know, she's basically the only person of color in the West Wing. And so we, you know, our little troop of like women of color interns were going through and sitting in her office and having a closed door meeting. Wow. And so I think things like that make some people nervous. So there could have just been the internal politics of
so there was that already, but now there's larger context.
But I also think that making it an official thing, right? The fact that I get called into the general counsel's office, I think that had to do with what it might appear like outside of, you know, and it's weird, like in the White House where they watch the NCAA for like the whole time it's happening. It's on all the screens. That there's a concern about.
That's the thing.
That's the thing they thought would make
us
look bad. Yeah.
I just have two quick more questions, and I want to kind of open it up. One question is, you know, I know in the Uncle Bobbie's community, there's a lot of people who are doing different types of organizing and activism, and you know, obviously the media is, you know, unavoidable when it comes to that. What kinds of lessons did you learn for those of us who are doing that in the process of doing this, writing this book?
Yeah. And I think I wrote them down too. Let me see, because I want to make sure I get them. Well, one of the things I want to say is that, like, the thing that stood out to me about the success of the Tea Party was how fundamentally different movements are right now. So, you know, when I kept trying to look at what was the Tea Party like, how was it like other things that have come before, like John Birch Society or the Ku Klux Klan, like other kind of right-wing movements. But those people are like card carrying, like you were a member of the Ku Klux Klan, like you paid dues, you know, you showed up, you had a card that had your name on it.
Organizational structure.
It was a formal, hierarchical, centralized organizational structure, and so the Tea Party didn't have to have any of that to be treated as a movement, or even given much credibility. It just had to have, you know, a bunch of people who spoke as spokespersons, but it was a lot less formal than like the Women's Liberation Movement or other groups that we've seen come before. Even like SDS, which is one of the famous, the Students for Democratic Society. Right. Todd Gatlin writes one of the kind of famous histories of that movement to track it, but it was different than that even. So what are the lessons learned? Let me see. Well, I think one of the things that I thought were takeaways for activists is like don't shy away from race and gender. So I was here in Philly organizing during Occupy, and there are ways in which people start to say things like race and gender are a distraction, or like identity is like not what we're about, like we're about these other things, and you're trying to, right, like that we put that on the side, but actually race and gender helped fuel the Tea Party's rise. It was, I mean, identity politics are part of what made it something that the news media wanted to come into and to talk about. Now, the issue is like, sometimes when I'm talking about the book, I feel like I start telling people how to brand themselves, which is a problem. Because actually, branding itself is shallow in a lot of ways, right? Gotcha. It's about creating the allure of a relationship between an object and a person, right. As opposed to like actually doing such thing, right? So,
I hear you saying like, how can we, I mean, part of the challenge, right, is how can we strategize without, we want the brand to be problematic, right?
So like a lot of times politics used to be about votes or policies, and like you had actual goals and you wanted people to represent a particular thing, right? And not just like a particular ideology. And so when you get too steeped in branding, then you get really wrapped up in who that person, like how the person makes you feel being it, right? Like Rahm Emanuel gets to be mayor of Chicago because partly how Obama made people feel, right? They're like, oh, you're from Obama, like, yay, come lead Chicago. But like actually when you look at his policies, they're really terrible, mostly for people of color.
But I mean, let me ask you just to kind of dance with you a little bit.
Yeah, please.
I mean, you had this great concept that you talk about called headphone culture in the book, right? Which is like, you could describe what it is. Can I take that stab at it?
Please.
Just idea of headphone culture where everybody, imagine a room, everybody's on their headphones, everybody does, I don't know, again, I was going to say younger relatives, but maybe some of us, we're all kind of on our headphones, and it takes a lot to get us to take the headphone off and pay attention, right? Thinking about, I thought it was a really nice metaphor for, in a way, what news organizations, what people who are activists and organizers are up against, right? We're up against that kind of culture. So in a way, you're saying don't brand yourself or don't engage in shallow branding practices.
Yeah.
But aren't we doing that as a way to try to cut through their headphone culture?
Just to shout at people to pay attention to them, but then you have nothing to say or offer. So I mean, I think strategically, we probably should think of branding as a tactic, but it shouldn't be the strategy. It shouldn't be the thing we're pursuing. So like we shouldn't be like Trump, because Trump has a whole different agenda, right? Like, Trump's agenda is building the Trump brand, and that's why people don't really get him. And I think at least that's what I feel. That's why most people don't get him. That's why politicians don't get him, because he's not like after necessarily. I mean, now he might want to be president because he's afraid of being arrested, but I think in general, like he could have come and gone with the second term or not having a second term. For him, having 38% of the American electorate who like love him and are dedicated if he like beheads people on the front lawn, like for him that's really important, because when he leaves he can get like more hotels and maybe like have Trump TV and have people who watch it, and you get 38% of the American populace watching your stuff and buying your t-shirts. Like that's a win for Trump, right? Like for him, his brand is the thing that is really important. And so you don't want to be that. You don't want to be the person who's really invested. And the Tea Party became that in certain places, right? Like they this one reporter who went to the Tea Party convention, people were selling items like representing the Tea Party. The Tea Party was charging tons of money for entrance into this convention, and they were like, well, because we're business people, right? And so Will Bunch actually called it Tea Party TM, trademark, right? That this was actually just kind of a brand that people were selling. And I don't think that should be the ends of any real social movement. But I do think that fidelity to a brand and having a clear brand is probably really useful in this kind of political age. And I think that's partly why the Democratic Party has so much trouble, because their brand isn't particularly clear in any way. Or coherent, right? And if you have really strong allegiance to one part of their brand, they tell you don't do that, right? They're like, oh, that AOC, she doesn't mean anything to us. That Elizabeth Warren is just like the leftist part of the brand. So then you're left with a certain incoherency. Incoherence. So I think, we have to balance all those things. What was the other thing that I wanted to say? This is just a fantasy, which is like that we should be developing our own kind of media echo chambers. Like MSNBC has Nicole Wallace worked for George Bush. She's a host, right? Like that's like Michelle Obama having.
This is supposed to be our leftist.
Yeah, like that's supposed to be our leftist sphere. We have like the opening of the day starts with like a Republican congressman, and the middle of the day has like a Republican. Yeah, so I think, you know, if we and just to imagine like Michelle Obama having a show on Fox, right? Like that would be crazy. It would never happen. And so we don't really have a leftist version of this. And, you know, most media people will say that's because the media itself is corporate, right? And it's always selling something, and so it's not ever going to be a leftist or liberal space. But I do think there are ways that we can start to try to at least create like sources of information that we kind of respect. And some people have tried to do that online through following certain kinds of people and like on social media and things like that. But you know, then it becomes a cult of that person, and all sorts of ruptures happen from that.
So one that goes beyond just the simple, like the cult of Sean Hannity or
yeah, if we can. I mean, I think that was one of them. Exactly. And then I feel like, I mean, we're in Philly, like Larry Krasner is the freaking DA here. That's crazy. He got me out of jail. So, you know, it's possible to win in certain ways. And I think even if the media doesn't respect like real grassroots organizing, it's still powerful no matter what. Like to me, Occupy was still powerful. You know, you had these like really crazy but very intense spaces of strangers from all walks of life meeting and doing yoga together and eating and sharing and feeding the homeless and providing them with medical care. Like these like insane ruptures of capitalism. And so that work is still really important.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. You made that feel easy.
I just want to check in real quick on Kendra, because we have an incredible guest. Khadija and I were trying to talk about ways that we could actually connect this to real politics going on right now in Philadelphia, and we were honored to be joined by Kendra. Kendra, can you hang out for the next 20 minutes? We're going to do the Q&A. All right, great. So we have that piece coming up.
Okay.
So yeah, let's just open it up, take some questions.
Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
You mentioned that the coverage of the Tea Party was more about what they were against rather than they were what
In that particular period.
At least being angry about things.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like, I mean, I wrote the book and it's done, but like it's never really done in my head. So sometimes I'm not sure I agree with myself. But yeah, anyway. Yes. No, it's not happening. This is the only sequel.
Thank you.
Yes, Katrina.
So I work in the field of education. I teach classes. I know you teach. And when I think about how messages are circulated, I often think about teaching. And so just to kind of connect all that, I wondered, how would you go about teaching your book or a chapter from your book? Like, what do you incorporate clips of something? Do you highlight certain concepts that you talk about? Or do you give people role play? Like, how do you kind of get people to understand the point of your book? And
I don't know. Well, now you're making me think of teaching my book. I don't teach it, which is weird because there are a lot of people who only teach themselves in academia. But so I like to think my larger talks are like teaching, and when I give larger talks, I often use clips of, like for instance, to help people understand that race and gender have always been embedded in branding. There's these old, maybe late 19th century soap advertisements that are about like saving civilization through soap and cleaning the masses, but it's clearly very like post-colonial kind of white savior rhetoric around soap. And there were lots of soap ads that showed like you washing a black person until they have soap, they're white, right? This notion of blackness is filth. So I'd like to show some of that stuff sometimes when I'm talking about the book a little bit, because I think it starts helping people understand that the way we relate to brands are different. One of the books I assigned in my PhD course was Slave in a Box. Yeah. And it's about the rise of Aunt Jemima. And Aunt Jemima is one of those products that people still buy. But like, she was a fake character created by a white company to sell pancakes to white people, make them feel like they still had like a black person working in their kitchens. And she had a whole personality and comes out of minstrelsy, right? But she still exists, she still sells stuff. So there's something about that. So I like to use those kinds of things. And then my like nemesis now is Annie the Chicken Queen, Popeyes.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes I her too. Because like, what does Annie do? Does anybody know what Annie does? No, right? She's like this weird, and the fact that people don't, like this is the thing I felt like was happening with the Tea Party. I was like, what is happening? Annie just shows up on my TV, and I don't know if she works there, if she owns Popeyes, if she like, she makes all these things for Popeyes. I don't know.
Right, it's just like it's just 19th century just reaching into our lives.
Yeah, but we don't read it that way because we understand brands in this way. It helps create this connection and it's rooted in these identities. Do y'all know what I'm talking about when I say Annie the Chicken Queen?
Yeah, come try my chicken.
Come on, try my chicken.
Yeah.
That fake accent. I think she's from like Pennsylvania.
One thing I thought about just on the teaching thing is, I'm often many of the students I find do think, particularly more so I would say, depending on, this really depends on what the ethnicity and where you're from, I'll just say it like that. They tend to think of the news as kind of objective and about the facts. And one of the things that I thought about while I was reading this book was moments that you point to where you really see the news acting as a marketing agent almost for the Tea Party, right? So it would be interesting to like call some of those examples and pull those up and say, is this how you understand the role of a journalist, like when they're doing this particular thing, and contrast that. I also thought about juxtaposing that with a music video by a friend of mine named Jasir Yex, who has a video called "What If the Tea Party Was Black?" And he just he actually I think said this in an interview where he said, "Can you imagine a group of armed black people marching into Washington? Like how far would they have gotten?" Right?
Yeah, often when I'm doing this, talking about race, I juxtapose a picture of a Tea Party with a gun and a Black Panther member with a gun and talk about the ways in which these images get read very differently by the press and by other people. Cause like they just be hanging around with like giant guns too and just chilling.
Were they at the rally you were at? Were the people armed?
I don't remember any. No,
That
DC. They don't play with that in DC.
Oh, not in DC.
No,
Gotcha.
but in other spaces they would be armed. There were Tea Party protests where they would just show up with guns outside like the Capitol, the local the state capitol of the place. And it was like all chill. There's like no police. You didn't see lights. I mean, it was amazing. Could you imagine if a bunch of armed black people showed up to stand outside of City Hall? The city was shut down. It was. I would almost certainly it was shut down.
The questions.
I hear a lot of like when we talk about like the history of the Tea Party, when we look back at it now, I hear a lot of talk about how the Republicans had this great strategy of winning small elections and then building up, and the Tea Party was this big part of that. But like the way that I don't know, the way that you talk about it seems like it was less organized. Like, are we in talking about the Tea Party and the way that Republicans swept state elections and stuff back in 2010? Is that just like painting a revisionist picture on a time that was far more disorganized?
I mean, I would say yeah. I would say this notion. I mean this little video that I'm doing for my job about the book, I start with talking about how Indivisible says, we should be like the Tea Party, right? That's how Indivisible launches itself with this idea that the Tea Party was extreme. America has this idea that it was so well organized, had all these people on the ground, and they were like foot soldiers. I don't think that's true. I mean, again, I didn't study the Tea Party, but even the stuff that I've read, right, says that's, that political scientists have done. They're trying to figure out who were the Tea Partiers, who were people, because there were no members, it's hard to study them, so you have to kind of study supporters or people who identify with the Tea Party.
When you say you didn't study, meaning you were studying coverage of it.
I was studying the coverage of the Tea Party,
right.
But I mean, I had to read, obviously, a lot about the Tea Party to do that, and read scholars who were writing about the Tea Party to do that. And I would say that largely, to me, right, I track those people who were coming and started doing meetings around this, that they were responding to a brand that really felt like an identity they could gel with, right? They didn't necessarily feel like they wanted to be Republicans. You have to remember, the Tea Party gets born after, like, Bush basically sent us into something like the Depression, right? I mean, Bear Stearns had crashed. We thought we were going to be in a Depression age for a really long time after Bush had left, so the Republican Party had lost some of its flair, right? The Tea Party kind of allowed itself to be this new brand that could help the Republicans while they repair themselves, I think, right? So that's what I would argue. I'm sure other people would offer a different explanation, but I would say that it was mostly kind of top down. So Dick Cheney, but Dick Armey, and who did Freedom Works.
Yeah, and Adam Brandon we talked about.
Yeah, so all these other figures who were coordinating, who were trying to bring things that they were doing from the 90s, right, back in and create them as like goals. And all of them seemed to me, as I read through all this stuff, seemed to be trying to figure out who was going to be in the position to define with it, to capture the way the brand had kind of flooded the media waves, including the Our Country Deserves Better.
So racing to
It's
capitalize
called
on
the
that.
Tea Party Express, yeah, like everybody, and then they, not only did they change their name to the Tea Party, but then they created these rallies that they could invite the media to, and Sarah Palin was on their tour, right? They hired a celebrity, right? Like, I mean, it was very much this kind of, so they were really good at branding, and Sarah Palin was also really good at branding. I mean, she used the pre-Trump, right? Like, she had Mama Grizzlies. She had women she selected who she said were like represented Mama Grizzly, like, and Mama Grizzly was this brand where it was like this political brand for women who supposedly were so angry they had to get involved to protect their baby cubs. That was the imagery. It's a really brilliant rhetorical move. But like half the women that she like supported didn't have children, right? But it was a brand. It was a brand that was effective. I saw your hand in the chat.
Yeah, it's sort of related, I guess. I was trying to think about how the Tea Party relates to sort of the type of like 4chan incel culture that's grown, you know, on Reddit and online and stuff, and like, so it strikes me that like what you're saying is that they all were able to sort of coalesce around this brand of the Tea Party. It gave them the opportunity. So is Trump sort of the equivalent now? Does he offer that brand to that sort of online discourse, or is there something else happening there? Is there a different way they're sort of branding themselves? Like, they seem more kind of dispersed, but so much like violent action has come out of those communities, and the rhetoric that they're espousing has made its way into popular culture. So I'm sort of curious, yeah, like.
I mean, what I learned, you know, reading this book, Khadijah's describing these multiple dynamics, right? A lot of times we want to boil things down to one thing, right? The Tea Party it just was like the racial piece. What I thought this book offers was it helps you see all these things working together, right? The kind of media we had at the moment when the Tea Party emerges, the sort of financial incentives about engagement, right? The anger and backlash about Obama, where the Republican Party was at, Conservative Party was at. And it's interesting because I think with this thing, part of what it does is these things with 4chan and intellectual dark web, Jordan Peterson, all these kind of people, and these sort of phenomena are often described as the Trump era, right? Even by, I think, Democrats who often want to just act like the only problem we have is Trump, and this is all the Trump era. And it was so clear to me in this book that all those mechanisms that allowed Trump to rise were actually at work, and in a way were learning their game during with the Tea Party. So that's one way I think that the Tea Party does. It shows you a Trump era before the Trump era, actually, particularly from how media is moving and why, and how that allows things that really you could make an argument maybe should not have gotten as much attention, wound up getting all this free promotion from both the conservative side and more left media as well. I mean, that's.
Yeah, I mean, Trump was a contributor to the Tea Party brand, right? He was a birther. He led the birthers, but it wasn't as like sexy of a word, right? I mean, Tea Party itself is a brand. The destruction of the tea, as it was called, the Boston Tea Party was called the destruction of the tea for 50 years afterwards. There's a bunch of things. But it's still part of that kind of those threads. And Trump just kind of steps into the space. But the thing is, you could have almost told he had a better brand. Like, even through the primary, he was up against like 20 people. Do you even remember what Jeb Bush was about? Like, Marco Rubio was there. He lost his own state. So I think.
You had an exclamation point.
Jim, and then I don't know what time.
Yeah, well, no, I think, maybe we'll take this last question and then when we have a thing we want.
Well, I'm interested in some of your studies on sort of the antecedents. It sounds like part of the argument you're making is, I guess, that Trump knew how to brand himself in business, and then he kind of took that branding skill and moved it over to politics when the Tea Party was helping to create this branding. And I was thinking of, particularly like on the left, sort of Labor Party cultures, and not just in the US, but in other countries where there'd be gatherings and folk songs and daily newspapers, and there was a whole kind of working class culture. So it has happened. I think it has happened on the left before, and we've never been really able to create it here. And the other thought I had, just from it being a few years before, and I studied it a bit, was the Promise Keepers.
Oh, yeah.
Because they could fill a stadium with 35,000 people.
Wow.
But they never quite moved it to a brand. And so somewhere in between those moments, the possibility for creating political brands.
Yeah, I think it was different because it wasn't a political brand, right? Like, wasn't Promise Keepers?
Well, it's a Christian
kind of men thing,
evangelical,
right? Yeah.
Christian, anti-gay.
Yeah, exactly.
Pro-family.
Yeah, and the weird thing about the Tea Party was it's supposed to be a marriage between libertarians and Christianity, which Republicans have been trying to do since forever, right? I mean, it's not new, but it was new in terms of it being represented and personified through particular kinds of political figures, like Palin and Paul. Sorry, while you were saying that, while I was listening to you, I wanted to say that it's hard for the left to do the same thing, right? Because part of the story I'm trying to tell is that the media study after study shows us the media is skewed conservative, right? They like repeating this is why Trump, by God, might not ever leave office, because he understands the way in which the bully pulpit works, right? That the media likes to talk to authorities about what is happening in the world, and then they use their version of the world to report events, right? And it's always been a real weakness of the media, and it's a real weakness that Trump can exploit. And so I don't know how the left can, part of what I'm trying to tell in this book, at least, is like telling the left to be like the Tea Party is unrealistic, because the media does not absorb a left brand the way that they absorb a right brand. But I guess what I'm also trying to say is that then we have to kind of imagine how we organize without this type of media infrastructure fueling our movements, right? Because a lot of the media coverage, a lot of the news analysis, even scholarship on movements through the media have been about how do leftists get the attention of the media? What gets their attention? How does the media report on left-wing uprisings? How do they make them look bad? How do they marginalize and trivialize them, right? All of these kinds of concerns about how to get the media's attention so you can get more members, you can get more support. But I think what I'm trying to say is also that we have to remember that the media is a corporate space, and so it's never really going to be a way to serve us. And so we have to think about that and not remember what happened with the Tea Party in the wrong way, because then we start to then paint leftist movements as being less than right-wing movements, when in fact it's just about power, like everything else.
Well, that's why I want to harken back to labor movements in the past, where they did manage to create that
real relationship building.
Relationships and culture, and their own kind of echo chamber.
Yeah, and it's not just somebody showing up and telling you, well, if you don't vote for me, you'll get Trump.
Right.
And so I think this is incredible transition to what we want to do next. But
Yeah.
because we actually have, Khadija and I were talking about how could we take this to the next level so we don't just end on this, what do you do? And we actually have a thing that we can do actually right now that I think is really powerful. So, but before we do that, let's give Khadija an incredible, Thank you for your wonderful questions. So on the question of this, one of the things we were talking about is the way that these sort of, if you could use the word biases, ideology that's built into the corporate media. It causes people who are, things that are spectacles to get a lot of attention, and one of the effects of that is that it marginalizes things that are happening at the local level, right? And focuses our attention on that. Where we're in Philly, we actually have real things going on. We have actually an election coming up in November, right? The other thing is that it creates a platform for certain kinds of people to get light and get attention, and where other kinds of people don't get as much attention, even though they may have better understanding of what's going on. So in talking about that, we decided to invite Kendra Brooks, who's basically going to be running for city council, and she's running now, and would be on the ticket November, right? And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're asking, and then I'd just like to invite Kendra to come say a few words about her campaign and what's at stake here, because we have a really great opportunity to take control of city council, particularly 2 problematic seats that exist right now. But let me just say, in order for Kendra to run, right, because she'll have a chance to campaign, you all can learn about her candidacy, she has to get enough petitions to actually get, on the ballot. So the petitions just allow her to campaign so you can really learn. But we also have Kendra here, and so we have some petitions here that I'd love you to sign, if you can, just to get name on put your name down, that Kendra can at least be on the ballot.
You have to be a Philly resident.
You have to be a Philly resident, so if you're not a Philly resident, don't sign, please. You are, by all means. And Kendra, could we invite you to come and talk about your campaign?
Would you?
And by the way, I'm sorry, I want to be quiet. I just want to say, Kendra, I moved to Philadelphia 2 years ago. Kendra has been, she just got me so charged up watching her be involved in battles for our schools and so many things. And she's really, how many blocks is it down in Nicetown?
Yeah, about 7. It's
7
longer
blocks,
distance.
right, yeah. So let me just let you do your thing. Oh yeah, and I'll have that.
Y'all don't mind, I'm gonna sit, is that okay? Alright. So, I'm running as a third-party candidate. So here in Philadelphia, we have 7 city council at large seats. There are 5 Democratic seats, which are already secured from the primary. Then there are 2 seats that are held for a minority party. In Philadelphia, historically, Republicans have always taken those seats. But we have an opportunity now to have, an independent run for this seat. I think there are like 6 independent candidates, but myself and my running mate, Nicholas O'Rourke, are running to take those 2 seats under the Working Families Party. So what you said, we talk about union organizations. So the Working Families Party is a national organization that consists of community, labor, and just folks from around the country just to build a third party. And that's what we're running on. Working for Our Families is our brand. Why am I doing this? I've been doing grassroots organizing as a education organizer first. I led my neighborhood against a fight against privatization with one of the larger charter providers here in the city. We organized 200 families in a low voter turnout district to vote, and we won.
Right.
I've also done work around the Federal Reserve Bank, pushing them to increase the interest rates at a time where joblessness was huge in our country. So I worked on that campaign for like 3 years. It was a national campaign with Center for Popular Democracy. I've also done some work with homelessness and housing, because housing is a crisis here in this city. Not just for poor people, for working class people. When we think about housing, people automatically want to go to public housing. But recently we just passed a law here in Philadelphia that affordable housing starts at $50,000. Now $50,000, people who work in City Hall don't make $50,000. So we're eliminating a large portion of people to be able to have some level of subsidized rent. And a lot of times people want to automatically think I'm talking about only poor people, but I'm talking about working class folks that can't afford to live in this city. We have multiple, like I have teacher friends. I do a lot of work with teachers. A lot of my teacher friends live 3-4 in a house, right? Because paying back student loans and maintaining the car and buying books and things for your students who can afford rent in Philadelphia. So those are things that are on my platform, including increasing the minimum wage. I've also worked with 35 different grassroots organizations in the city. I'm part of something called Alliance for a Just Philadelphia. I was doing this work way before I decided to run for office, but I plan on taking all of those relationships into city council with me, because we need to have folks that really care about the people. And when I say about the people, I'm talking about people that aren't beholden to anyone. One of the phrases I like to say, my favorite person is Shirley Chisholm, 1972. She ran for president. I was born, and she's unbought and unbossed. And that's who I am. I've had opportunities to live a better life for my kids. I mean, have a better life. And I turned down opportunities because they were against my values and my principles. And those are the things I plan on taking in the city council. And I know I can win. We have a huge grassroots movement that is really rallying behind and support my campaign. I have numerous teachers. On election day, I had 60 volunteers on election days collecting petition signatures for me at the larger polling locations. And we had a petition launch on Saturday where more people joined those 60. So the goal is for us to get on the ballot. Since Krasner did such a wonderful job of turnout last November, the numbers to get on the ballot has increased drastically. So we have a goal of, not a goal, we have a number legally of 3,265, I think. Our goal is to get 10,000 to make sure that we can fight off any petition ballot challenges that come. And I cannot do it without the support of everyday working people. And we talked about this branding thing, which was really a big deal for me because I'm not a politician. I'm an activist, I'm a community organizer, I'm a mom, I'm a grandmom, I'm all of these other things. I'm a community servant. Like, I connect with folks in my neighborhood to make sure that things are better. And that's usually not a popular brand. You know, it's easy for me to polish up, which I've polished up more than, I like t-shirts and jeans. Everybody that knows me like, oh, this is a new look. But understanding that how I enter the room determines, you know, who I am. So I have to keep those things in mind. And when we talk about how the media perceives you, I have been on the news at least once a week. The news, the paper, the radio, some kind of way over the last 6 months, at least once a week, right?